Good evening, everyone. Most of you are very familiar with the Constitution in Canada, and some of you of the younger generation have seen how the education system focuses on civics now. Now, your civics course probably give you a good high-level view of things, but I'm going to give you a Coles Notes version of how government operates in terms of the financing and constitutional powers. So, if we look at the way the Constitution is set up, and we look at the division between federal and provincial powers, there's certain powers at a federal level from national defense, foreign affairs, EI, Banking Act, federal taxes, post office, or in general federal regulated businesses that the federal government's under control. There's also what I call as the provincial powers, which then come into play that more localized issues you deal with, and that's operations of hospitals, that's getting into school boards, education, it's getting into natural resource development and the setting of a hydro rate. So there's distinct powers for purpose reasons to get more control over decisions on a local level. So the federal government sets certain federal powers, the provincial has their own set of powers. Now, you're going to hear a lot about transparency and accountability by Thomas Mulcair in the budget cycle. The budget cycle typically is a long process. It doesn't matter if you're provincial, municipal, or federal. It's a pretty long process, but I'm going to be clear and succinct here. The information is available at times when they're going through the estimates and going through the discussions. When they get near the final stages, they get into what they call as lockdown mode to make sure the information doesn't get out. And there's a reason why that happens, because what they want to ensure that information is not getting out that will influence maybe foreign direct investments or the stock market. So that's why you hear lockdown all the time. So you need to be very careful to what Mulcair is selling you on transparency and accountability. The information in general is out there. If you go out and do a search on the requests, reports, and priority, that's available. If you go look at the Finance Committee on the budget cycle, you'll see that. If you want to see final audited statements, they're available. So the information's out there. Plus, you also can get perspectives from Policy Alternative Association, Broadbent, PBO office. So if you use Google, you can find information if you choose to go look for it. So let's talk about taxation. All levels of government have certain control over taxation. The federal government really sets the payroll taxes. They set some corporate tax rates. They also have personal and consumption tax, right? So they can set those, okay? Now, what happens to payroll taxes, and you can see what's happening in Ontario's case, some provinces are trying to set their own, but they really like to be partnered with Ottawa in terms of the collection and management of that cycle. But payroll taxes are very careful, you have to watch for, because they're known as a job killer tax, because again, you're adding costs where it has to be matched. You can listen to all the rhetoric from the left on it, it's an investment, but the problem is when you look at CPP and EI, those things are matched by companies. Now CPP is matched dollar for dollar, and basically EI is matched like 40 or 50% more of that as well. So you need to be very cognizant of that. Now let's talk about the flow based on the Constitution. In order to support provinces with that bucket of federal revenue money, they created these transfers to move money down to provincial levels to support healthcare, daycare, or other words where they cannot deliver because they don't have the revenue capacity. That's what equalization is. That being said, Stephen Harper can only move so much money down there. It's up to the provinces to execute their strategy in terms of daycare, post-secondary school. If they set the wrong priority, that has nothing to do with Stephen Harper in terms of giving money. This is something that Mulcair and Trudeau are not clear in terms of accountability and on how the provinces are going to be more efficient and effective use of precious dollars, because that's never been said. Unless you're talking about communism or looking at dictatorship type of systems on the healthcare accord and forcing things down, which hasn't been technically done in the past. So let's also now talk about trade and investment. That is critical because that drives your corporate, that drives your personal taxes. Exports are about $530 billion in Canada, and they're driven by trade and investment deals. Trade and investment deals then drive what we call as foreign direct investment. So the comments you hear about balance of payments or trade deficits all relate to the difference between exports, and a lot of it has to do with foreign direct investment and the outflow of capital. So what Canada needs is to bring investment capital into this country to help develop, whether it's manufacturing, aerospace, natural resources. The next point of this slide I wanted to show you is how the provinces come into play. Now, the provinces themselves can set local policies that can drive how business wants to invest. So if you put stringent policies around resource extraction like Ontario has done and make it more difficult for resources to come out of the ground to be extracted and refined, and guess what's going to happen? You're going to lose that investment in terms of natural resources, which again, as an overall impact to the economy, it's about 400 billion to GDP, including both direct or indirect. Indirect means that can be anything from the grocery stores supporting workers to the roads to the manufacturing equipment that goes into mining operations, etc. But you don't hear that from O'Carroll and Trudeau talking about the resources. What you hear them talk about is platitudes. You hear them talk about green energy, but you do not hear them talk about a coherent strategy on how they're going to look at all aspects of the economy that will drive imports and exports. Well, imports is part of it, but at the export side is critical to reduce that balance of trade. So the reason why I showed you this is to kind of give you a clear, distinct of provincial powers where policy can dictate how investment flows. That investment flows impacts the overall health of an economy.